So about 7:45 or 8. Okay, cool. I just want to make sure that I'm not gonna like be painting the Mona Lisa until like 4 a.m. with you guys. So hi, I'm Jaya. Thank you for having me. And yes, I'm going to be doing an acrylic demonstration for you this evening, specifically focusing on how to work with a limited color palette in order to achieve maximum color mix results. And I am like the biggest color nerd that you're going to find. I absolutely love color mixing. It's my favorite class that I teach. And so being able to really showcase that skill set is near and dear to my heart. So I'll be doing a, air quotes, simple landscape using only 4 colors. And before I actually jump into the painting, you'll notice on the list of the participants in the demo, there is a participant called Jaya's Pallet Cam. So I want to make sure that you can find that participant. And if you click on it, you'll find my Pallet Cam. So you'll be able to watch me mix while I'm painting. And I believe that if you go into full screen or speaker view, there's a way that you can pin both me and the Pallet Cam next to each other. So without going into like tech support, because no one needs me to have a brain aneurysm describing how to use Zoom, you can have me and my Pallet Cam up at the same time. The colors I'm using this evening are these are my go-to colors. These are the colors that I've taught with in like 95% of my acrylic classes, and they, I just love seeing the range that they have. So the 4 colors that I'm using, I'm going to hold them up for you guys. We've got, let's see if we can do it like this. Are you going to focus? No? Oh, that's right, because I have auto tracking on. We have quinacridone magenta, or you could put Q magenta, quin magenta. We have ultramarine blue. I love this guy, ultra blue. For my yellow, I'm using Hansa Yellow Light. And these colors, this is going to be like the basic red, yellow, blue. And this is like I mentioned, my go-to. Of course, I want to be able to do some beautiful tinting. So I've got titanium white in the wings. Playing with these 4 colors, you're going to be able to get an extremely broad range. And this is just one limited color palette of red, yellow, and blue. You can, of course, swap these out for, say, Cad Red Light, Phthalocyanine Blue, and Cad Yellow Dark, or Prussian Blue, Yellow Ochre, and Alizarin Crimson if you want more of a traditional color palette. But I'd like to show you what you could do with these 4 colors, and specifically how you can really play with those mixes. All right. I'm also going to be using mainly a number 10, or about a 1-inch wide, bright synthetic acrylic brush. The brush that I love using. And P.S. If y'all are kind of new to Zoom, I'm honestly very new to Zoom, and so I'm learning all these little tips and tricks. But there's a chat that if you type questions in the chat, I'll be able to follow through the chat at the end of the demo and answer the questions. That way there's not a whole lot of interruptions of questions. So if you type your questions in the chat, I'll be able to go through at the end of the demo and follow along with any questions that are posed. So this particular brush, this is by a company called Princeton, and it is their Umbria line brush. I love this brush because it gives you some very smooth brush strokes. You can get some beautiful blends, and you can also get some very precise. Oh, someone's screen sharing. Hi, Cree. Is that you? Oh, you're screen sharing with me. That's fun. Let's see if I can view options. That's odd. Go here. Oh, that was fun. Zoom decided to do a screen share. Am I echoing with you guys?
I was trying to split the screen between you and the Jaya's Pallet Cam, and it didn't work. Sorry.
Got it. No worries. That's the fun thing about Zoom and technology. Oh God, what's happening now? Yeah, so Karif, oh, thank you. Yay. So you somehow figured it out and it's not echoey anymore. Awesome. So anyway, oh, it's still kind of echoey. That's odd. Let's see if I can, okay, that sounds better, a little bit better. So I like using about a 1-inch wide brush, and I also have about a 1/2 inch wide brush for detail work. And they're both brights, which is sort of like a stubby flat. You get a little bit more control with those. I also have the palette that I'm working on is a disposable palette. So you can really just go to town and rip it up, throw it away when you're done. I also will be using a product called Matte Medium, and I put it in this little ketchup container so I could squeeze it out. It's a little bit easier to use than like a wide mouth jar that it usually comes in. So Matte Medium is a product that I'll use for glazing with this demo. And I like using this, but it's like milk on cereal with me. This is one of my favorite tools to use. And I don't usually mix with a palette knife, which is funny because the body of work that I just finished that will be shown in February is all palette knife. So it's like I don't use a palette knife, but apparently it's like my new favorite thing since sliced bread. So maybe I could come back for a palette knife demo. Okay, cool. Let me get over to the sheet of canvas set that I'll be demonstrating on. So I'm going to pause my video for just a sec. And then I'm going to get you over here.
Jaya, I have you pinned right now with the spotlight on. Maybe I'll try and see if I can pin both. Okay. So let's see. Let me see if it works.
All right, no problem. I'm just getting my new camera angle.
All right.
Does that look okay for everyone?
Yeah, that looks great.
Okay, good. Then we can see both. Yeah, cool.
Awesome. Come on. Okay. All right. Okay. This will be fun because my really fancy Sony camera is trying to focus on something that is not there. So there will be some nice blurry focus in and out until I start actually putting paint on here. Let's just do that. Awesome. Okay. So this piece of paper that's up on my wall is a piece of canvas set. This is an awesome sort of kind of like pseudo canvas paper that's awesome to use for practice, for studies. You know, it's not that intimidating stretched canvas that sometimes gives you this like deer in headlights look, like don't mess up. But this is great. You could also use the backside. So I love using this for demonstrations, and I just have it taped up with some blue painter's tape. Okay. And by the way, I don't have a photo reference that I'm using this evening. This is just something that is sort of in my head, and you know, I sort of manipulate it and execute it along the way. So I don't have a picture in front of me that I'm going after. So for the landscape, and I like playing with depth with landscape, I'm going to give myself, and I think that you guys should be able to see this. Excellent. I'm going to give myself some distant hills in the background. Let's do another one. Cool. So hopefully you guys can see I've got a couple of distant hills in the background. Got some middle ground hills. And I also have some lines marking foreground hills. If you guys can see over here on my palette cam, hopefully you could see my fingers wiggling around. Excellent. Oh, yay. You got my palette cam? I love when technology works. Oh my gosh. Like I don't need to be on like the tech support call anymore. I just want the dang thing to work. Cool. So over here on my palette cam, I'm going to squeeze out a little bit of my quinacridone magenta and my Hansa yellow light. And honestly, if this were just me in my studio, I would mix boom directly with my brush, but just for funsies, because I like to showcase some other techniques, I'm going to mix these colors with my matte medium with my palette knife. And the most important part of the palette knife to me is the back side of the palette knife. And it's really important to use it in terms of like a almost like you're applying putty or wallpaper paste or stucco, I guess, instead of using it like a shovel or a spoon. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to mix up a little bit of a beautiful warm, almost like a sunset orange, and I'm sneaking a little bit of that matte medium in with my color. And there's a lot of pushing and squishing when it comes to palette knife work, I found, or at least the way that I like to use it. Excellent. So that gives me a beautiful sort of like an autumnal orange that I am going to use to tone my canvas. And I can grab my matte medium as needed to make it nice and transparent. And I've really let my hair down with how I tone my canvas. I used to be, I would say, a little bit more, I don't know how I could say this without being offensive, but I used to be a little bit more AR about it. I hope you guys know what that means. If you don't, put it in the chat and someone will answer you. So I used to be a little bit more, I would say, high maintenance about my tone. And at this point, because so much of it is going to be covered up, I'm very casual with how I apply that very first layer. It has a lovely transparency because I'm using that matte medium. If I didn't use any matte medium with this color, it would go on, you know, very, very strong. And when I grab some matte medium, I can push that around and really get that nice and translucent. I'm also a huge fan of Golden brand paints. I'm a Golden girl, so I'm always going to toot their product. Golden is a gorgeous artist grade quality acrylic paint. And they also have their own line of oils as well for all my oil painters out there that say, but I don't want to use acrylics. Well, no problem. They have Williamsburg oils. It's also by Golden. They even put out their own line of core watercolors, which is a stunning watercolor line. QOR, core watercolors. But tonight we're using Golden's acrylic paints. Awesome. So I just gave myself a toned background to play against, and you're going to be surprised at how much of this is going to be covered up. So as I'm working with these products and these tools, I am very rarely going to grab water. And when I do, I'm going to grab such a small amount. Like you really, I don't think you can even see it with the palette cam, but you can see my water right over here. Excellent. Whenever I grab my water, I'm literally just dipping the tip of the brush in the water and mixing that in the paint on the palette to loosen that paint up. I'm not dunking my brush. And so that's I would say a big misstep with a lot of painters who are either starting with acrylic or you know, have just kind of found some challenge with it. It's like you're overwatering your plants, you're overwatering your product. So on my pretty junky looking palette right now, I've got my yellow, my red. I also squeezed out my blue, and I have a little bit of white over here. Whenever you're working with white and matte medium, keep them apart because you're going to get confused as to which is white and which is matte medium, and you don't want to run into that. So awesome. With my landscape, I want to get my sky blocked in first. And you know what's really awesome with acrylics? Even when it's like 50 degrees in your studio, this is already dry. How awesome is that? Cool. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of sky just to at least have some structure at the top. That's the wrong size brush. Some structure at the top of my canvas. And so sneaking a little bit of that beautiful ultramarine blue, Hansa yellow light to make it more of like a aquamarine. I'm going to give that a nice tint with titanium white. And of course, depending on the mood of the day, you can tweak that blue to be either a little bit more of like an evening tone where it leans maybe a little bit more lavender, or if you want it to be closer to midday, and I think I want this to be maybe a little bit closer to midday. I like to lean a little bit more yellow into this color. So gorgeous. I'm going to sneak this sky. I'm going to find my horizon line. Are we going to buckle? Yeah, that's okay. We'll just put you right back there. There you go. What I'm doing is I'm blocking in some of that sky almost like as negative space. Notice how some of this original tone can start to play as either like clouds at sunset or just like a little element of interest. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply that sky color, not as just like, you know, I'm painting a wall, but I like to consider that that sky color is sort of slicing through that sky, but not covering absolutely everything. So there can be some nice little sneaky clouds hiding in there. Wonderful. With my sky, I like to have my horizon be ever so slightly lighter, because that's really where the atmosphere of the earth is thicker and it's trapping light. So if ever you notice, you know, I love using Highway 280 as an example, and especially since I'm talking to my San Jose peeps, my Bay Area peeps, you guys really know that when you're driving down Highway 280 and you're looking at those gorgeous receding hills, the sky that is touching those hills will be lighter than the sky that's closer to outer space. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I'm going to look much more closely now.
Yeah, observe it. Cool. So I just mixed up a little bit of a tint of that sky, that same sky color. I just added a little bit of white to that blue. And I'm finding that edge of my furthest hill, and I'm starting to sort of trap that atmosphere. The last demo I did, someone had a really good question about my brush strokes. And my brush strokes are very, I would say, almost like a swing back and forth. I'm not like pawing at the canvas. So the way that I get these, I would say more wispy brush strokes is with a back and forth swing, and I'm using my wrist to control that motion. Wonderful. I think that what I'll do, I'm going to commit to this being an afternoon sky. So I'm really just going to go with a higher tint of that blue. And if you notice on my palette cam, can you guys see this okay? This is very helpful. Do you see how there's a gradient of like dark, middle, light? This is how I'm moving through that sky color. So finally, I'm going to give myself some clouds, and I'm going to commit to a midday sky. So bye-bye. Bye-bye, sunset clouds.
Oh, but I
Yeah,
like
that
the
kind of
sunset clouds.
You like the sunset clouds? Well, that's too bad.
Too
Bye-bye.
bad.
That's too bad. You're SOL.
Not today.
No.
Dang it.
Dang, I like the sunset clouds. But I am leaving a little bit of that toned background peeking through underneath. Do you see how there's like little sneaks of that coral that's just kind of peeking through? That's the subtlety of keeping that background and not painting over absolutely everything. And that's so much more interesting to look at than just like the white of a canvas to me. So cool. So we've got some nice little, we've committed to afternoon. You know, thank you guys for bearing with me. We have some nice afternoon clouds, and we have a slight gradient of the sky. It's a little bit lighter towards the horizon, and then as it extends up towards outer space, it gets a little bit darker. So now that I have this beautiful sky color on my brush, oh, P.S. something that's kind of cool to notice specifically with how I paint and how I go through this landscape, I want you guys to notice how often I totally rinse my brush. So that's sort of like a little challenge. I want you to see how I just like need to completely eradicate and rinse my brush. So far, none. This is all, or aside from the toned background, but with the sky, this is still the color that's on the sky, or on the brush. With my background hill, because I have this sky color already on my brush, that furthest hill is going to be the lightest hill out of all the hills. So essentially, it's almost like you're taking that sky color and you're ever so slightly upping the saturation. You're making it just a little bit more colorful. So you guys see how I moved from sky color into background hill color. How handy is Pallet Cam, by the way? Pallet Cam is like my BFF. So let's do this over here. Wonderful. Oh, and by the way, I do want to mention that I have started a once a month demo series where I am demonstrating a particular technique. And then with that demo, you receive a step-by-step handout, materials list, and with illustration on the handout of how to do what I am demonstrating. You'll also receive the recording of the demo so you can watch it over and over and over again. So the next one I'm doing is on February 6th. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So notice how my hill color is, oh my gosh, kind of sort of too close to my sky color. Like it just kind of blended. Well, that's not good. I need it to be just a little bit more saturated. Little bit of a darker value. So I'm just pushing that so that we're starting to see a little bit of a difference there. I'm going to say that's good for my first layer of hills. Now that I'm moving into my second furthest hill, as my hills come forward in the composition, they begin to increase with how colorful they are. They increase in saturation. So my mixes become a little bit more colorful. And I'm still only working with the blue, the yellow, and the white in these colors. There's a difference. Yeah, I like making sure you can see the difference. Excellent. Lovely. I'm finding that edge, using the blade of my brush to create a nice sharp edge. And whenever I feel that my paint starts to, get like plasticky or a little bit gummy, because, we love acrylic because it's liquid plastic, but when it starts to feel plasticky, or if it starts to like pull on you, if you will, that's usually when I'll grab just a little bit of the water and mix that in with my acrylic on the palette. You'll run into wiping away of paint when you mix the water on your canvas. And that's another misstep that I see a lot of people take. Okay, I have my next hill coming forward. Now I've got these two beautiful middle ground hills. I want to start getting into some more earthy, muted browns. So with what's on my brush, oh, P.S., how often have I rinsed my brush?
0. This is exciting. I'm counting.
Oh my God, we don't have to rinse our brush anymore. No. Okay, I'm gonna get just like a little bit more of this hill color going. I'm starting a new little paint pile over here. Let's get into Greenland. And honestly, these colors that are on my palette, they're going to give you some pretty brilliant secondary colors, and somewhat, I would say, like almost like Crayola secondary. Like if you needed to grab a green out of a crayon box, you're going to get it with these colors. So learning how to make them appear a little bit more natural is all part of the color mixing. So I have this, not very impressive green. I want it to, or I would say it's not the green that I want for my subtle landscape. So if I want to make it a little bit more muted, I'm going to grab some red and I'm going to mute that green down. And there's still white on my brush. So this is going to have like a sort of like a misty, hazy gray. Yeah, there we go. And where's that? Find the edge. There we go. Yeah. And you could also see that it's a little bit of a darker value than what's behind it. So it's starting to come forward. Yeah. I have a nice little hill kind of coming down in here, and it's sort of meeting this valley action. I'm sneaking a little bit more yellow into this. It's almost like an army green. And with each time that I pull more paint in and apply it to the canvas, the more of the primaries that I mix, the less influence the white has on in this color mix. So it's becoming more and more saturated. There's a balancing act with color mixing. You might find that you grab too much of one color, too much of another. And so there's this teeter-totter that you find in between colors. And you're gonna track you, right? There we go. you'll find this teeter-totter in between colors trying to achieve, you know, what you're looking for. And so really understanding how colors interact is very important. So notice how I've decided to leave some of that that toned background peeking through, you know, and it can look kind of distracting at first, but what I think might be kind of lovely is if I put in a little bit of a river coming through this valley. And so I'm leaving some of this to show through as I put in my little standing water. So it's almost like a place marker, a placement. There we go. Wonderful. Because I don't want to completely like reset and go back to my sky color, I want to get all the way down to my foreground. I'm going to continue on this path. Let me squeeze out a little bit more of my Hansa yellow light. Yeah. And we're going to get nice and saturated as we get up close. You see how I turned that olive green on my little palette cam over here? And I'm starting to get into
Brown.
yeah, some more browns. Let's get you nice and dark. And I do want you in my green territory, so I'm sneaking a little bit more yellow in there. Come on. Don't want you looking like a Kelly green. There we go. Let's try that. That'll be close. With this first layer of paint, you know, I'm not too worried about details. I'm really just getting that color down. I'm okay with having some of that toned background sneaking through underneath. And I'm really just kind of blocking in this landscape. There we go. Closest hill. I made this sort of like a funky little purple, but I want a nice dark value in the front. So with this structure, I can now go in and I can, oh, P.S., how often have I rinsed my brush?
Zero.
Zero. Let me see if I can brighten this up for you guys just a touch. This is all part of the learning curve about technology. No, that's too dark.
Yeah.
It's a little bit better, a little bit lighter. Okay, cool. So now that I have the ABCs down of my landscape, I can go in and I can give it a little bit of love. So at this point, yes, I do want to rinse my brush because I don't want to put my, you know, my yucky purple up into my sky. So I do rinse my brush. And when I rinse my brush, I really make sure that there isn't any color that's being squeegeed out. And I don't know if you guys can see this with the palette cam, but I do have a roll of paper towels, and I'm dabbing my brush on the paper towels to get as much of that color, or I'm sorry, as much of that water off as possible, because water can totally derail a color mix. Cool. So now that I have a nice clean brush, I'm going to go back up into my sky. I'm going to add a little bit of refinement. So let's go back into our sky color. Mixing my aquamarine. I want it to be a tint. There it is. Does someone have the TV on in the background? If you do, could you mute yourself, please? Thank you. There it is. Awesome. So with this second layer, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I was like, what are you listening to? What's on TV? So with this second layer, I'm going in with more of a soft touch. So I'm adding matte medium into my color mixes, and I'm creating a beautiful glaze to create a little bit more of like a blended, delicate, soft sky. This is where I take my time and, you know, get that little bit of love on my canvas. I will also incrementally increase the amount of white into my sky a little bit at a time. If you go full blast white, it starts to look very illustrative, almost like a comic book, if you will. But if you slowly build up the white with tints, it begins to look a little bit more natural. So hopefully my sky should look a little bit more delicate on the camera. And that way I have a nice sort of a sunrise, little trapped atmosphere happening down here. And you can also see that there's definitely a jump in those beautiful values between the sky and this distant hill. Now that I have this sky color on my brush, I'm grabbing a little bit more matte medium, and I'm just kind of hanging out in this sky color mix. I want this to be nice and transparent, and I like to do little tests off to the side with a brush stroke just to see how see-through it is. And I'm going to begin to push those background hills just a little bit further back with that glaze. You see how they're starting to recede just a little bit more?
Mm-hmm.
They don't look as, you know, cut and paste, cookie cutter. Awesome. Oh my gosh, here I am at my valley. How cool is this? Let's put some settled mist in our valley. Well, that's a lot of settled mist. Let's do a little bit less settled mist.
So more matte medium.
Matte medium. Lovely. So now my hills are starting to have a little bit more of a delicacy to them. And remember how I mentioned that I might want to do a little bit of a river traveling through my valley? Water is going to act like a mirror to whatever is above it. So that sky color is going to make sense for my little water feature in here. And so I'm going to mix up just a touch more sky color because I have a little bit more area to cover in my valley. Lovely. Let's see how you look. When I block in my water, I'm using my brush as a blade. So I'm really using the edge of my brush to create those fine lines And then depending on how much pressure I'm applying, those bristles will splay. And I can get a little bit of a bolder line. So how cool that I have a little river hiding in there. There it goes.
Very cool.
Oh, I'm so glad. Awesome. So essentially, I just kind of pushed back that original tone, and I'm using it now as like a fun little accent, you know, behind some of this, behind some of these layers. So this first layer of water can appear very one-dimensional. Sure, we get that it's water, but to give it a little bit of a pop, this is where we can play with more tint and give it that second layer of highlight. You guys should be able to see that on screen.
Yeah.
I just like
reflection. Yeah.
and I'm leaving some of that, you know, that original color underneath to play against it, because that's what gives it depth. If I just paint over the dang thing, it's just going to look like lighter water. But by leaving some of that original color, you know, it's going to start to look almost like the water has some depth to it. So wonderful. So now that I have my water feature in here, I like calling it a water feature. It's like a little bubbling brook. What I'd like to do is I'd like to refine some of the middle ground where I have this hill kind of descending into this valley. There's some valley around the water. And so I want to put some attention on this before I start traveling down into my foreground hills. Because I want to get into more earthy colors and I have a lot of white on my brush, this is where I do want to rinse that white off of my brush. So I've rinsed my brush without counting the tone background twice so far. I'm just going to get that water off. Lovely. So let's go into some more earthy greens. And because I have all of this orange that's just hanging out, I'm just going to grab from that, mix a little bit of blue in there. And now I'm starting to have a good square one on an earthy green, because I don't want it to be too green. I'm sneaking just a touch of red in there, and that's going to start to mute that green. Oh, now we're getting into some beautiful browns. I just made a gorgeous army brown with those 3 primary colors. Excellent. Again, matte medium is my friend, and I'm just sneaking a little bit of that slightly off to the side so I can create a glaze of that army green. And that'll start to lend a little bit of body without like painting full-blown opaque. And this hill, I'm allowing it to kind of come right into that river or that water feature, whatever you want to call it. And I'm sneaking just a little bit of yellow in there to kind of play that there might be some more lush vegetation. I don't think the camera's picking up all the delicacy too closely. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to kind of push the envelope and see if this shows up. Okay, that's a little bit better. That should look like there's a little bit of a difference in green happening. One thing that I discovered when transitioning from demonstrating live, where you see the painting in person, to demonstrating virtually, is the camera doesn't pick up all of the nuances. And so I'm finding that I'm having to exaggerate my colors so it'll show up on Zoom. And so I'll be over here just like immersed in this like very delicate blend. And I'll look over at the camera and there's like none of that. I'm like, oh shoot.
Oh.
Okay, let me just make like a circus color and put on so you can see the dang thing. So anyway, I'm needing to kind of like push it a little bit just so you can sort of see some of the differences, but it does look different in person. But that's just one of those things where you're like, oh, okay, let's at least make sure it shows up on camera. Make sure you have enough Wi-Fi to broadcast the dang thing. So many fun things to learn when going digital. Oh my gosh. So we can start to see how we're getting away from those subtle, distant, atmospheric blue greens into more lush greens in our middle ground hill. And now that we're starting to come up into the foreground, into these foreground hills, just for fun, to really kind of like showcase how much you can do with these colors. This might not be natural in the world, but I'm going to start putting in maybe some dried grass colors in these hills, just so you can see the range of what colors you can play with these three primary colors. So I have that same orange that I was playing with our original toned background, and I just snuck some of that army green and a little bit more yellow in there. So I just made this, I would say it's not a very pretty orange, but it's definitely going to be natural. And I want it to have a little bit of transparency. So the matte medium, okay, cool. We could see that difference. There it is. I just want to make sure you can see that.
Wow. Look at the change. And
we definitely have a change there.
Yeah.
Oh, this hill, oh my gosh, this is what's so fun when you're not working with a photo reference, because you could just veer off course whenever you want. So this little guy that kind of found its edge, I'm going to give us a path to walk way down into that valley. What? It was 2 hills and now there's a path? Oh, that's fun. So
Jaya, that's amazing.
Thanks, guys. So we're at 7:41 right now. Is it okay if I go till 8?
Everyone, hands up. I'm good. Yeah, we're thoroughly in growth.
Awesome. Okay.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay, awesome. So that way I could just like fully tie it together. Okay. So now that we have definitely like we have our sky, we have our background, middle ground, we have foreground, we have something that's kind of leading us in. And what's kind of cool is we now have a really nice sort of like a S-shaped composition happening with our landscape. I'd like to put a little bit more attention on that foreground, because when you have your foreground, you're going to have much more detail because the eye is going to pick up detail, whereas way back here in the background, we're not going to see the bird that's landing on the freaking oak tree on the top of this mountain back here. So we're not going to do the detail back there, but we'll hang out up here. We're kind of going with this really nice brushstroke of grasses on these foreground hills. So to really emphasize that, what we're going to do is we're going to start jumping a little bit of white into this grass mix to create sort of a tint. So I'm going to go back to that last mix that we were playing with, which is sort of like that, kind of junky pumpkin orange. I'm going to sneak a little bit of titanium white off to the side, so you can we're really going to see that this is a tint of this grass color. You know, I'm grabbing just a touch of that. There it is. That way it's not so orange. So this, we're definitely in like putty land. So this right here, this is where I'm going to be a little bit more considerate of my brush strokes. And I'm using the blade of my brush.
What do you want?
I'm using the blade of my brush, and I'm doing a mini version of the first brush stroke that I did with this guy. It's a back and forth brush stroke. And I think that you guys can see that with that slight back and forth stroke, I'm getting some really nice dried grass planted in my foreground. And extend those brush strokes off the canvas so it doesn't look like I'm, you know, stifled by the edges of my canvas. I'm going to come on over here. Oh, I need way more of this color. Where are we? Let's get some of that. No, that got too gray, too green. We want to go back to dried grass. So we're going to force the subject with that yellow, sneaking a little bit of that orange. Okay, now we're getting back. Thank you. Sometimes you'll get derailed with a color by assessing what's going on with the color. Is it too blue? Is it too purple? Is it too, you know, what color does it lean to? Well, to kind of bring it back to neutral, consider what the complement of that color is and add that complement. And that's going to bring it back to that neutral that you might be trying to achieve. So that's just what happened right here. I accidentally grabbed a little bit too much blue, and so it really swayed that color green. So now I have that kind of that dried grass color back on my brush. And so to really get this stroke, it's going to be more natural for me to hold my brush so that my shoulder might be blocking. Oh, this is going to be a hard one. There we go. Okay, good. There it is. I'm finding that kind of like that swoop of the hill where my little path is. Instead of like painting a V of grasses, I like to think of how that might naturally move from one shape of the hill into that divot. I'm not covering absolutely everything up. I'm leaving some of that original color showing through underneath. And so that's creating a really nice effect of depth. And so that gives us a little bit more of a dried grass on our hills closest to us. And now that I have that structure in, I can add more white to that mix as a tint. Start to pop the highlights of that grass. I like making sure that you can see it. kind of reminds me of something that you might see like in Bodega Bay or driving along some of those mountain roads close to the coast. My little highlights, my little grass highlights, I don't have to put them over absolutely everything. So do you see how if I just kind of keep them close to my path, that's really drawing your eye and
Yeah.
telling you, like, no, we're going to go down this way. And so that kind of gives us a little bit more of a obvious entrance into our landscape. And just because I like to dare myself, let me give myself a strong highlight with a lot of white. Really make sure that my brush is nice and has a nice crisp edge. Where are we going to put you? Strong foreground grasses, like we're literally walking through.
We're in the grass.
Oh, that brush stroke is nerve-wracking.
It was fun to see your process.
Thank you. So the limited color palette of just using the red, the yellow, and the blue with the tints of white really gives you a pretty impressive range of how you can stretch these colors. And you know, and like I mentioned, color mixing is, you know, it's near and dear to my heart. Oh, it's near and dear to my heart. Oh, there's a big old echo there. Oh well, that's okay. And so let me put it back on. Let me go like this. This is what's so cool about there we are. Look, there's me. There I am. So you know, I think you can tell that I'm extremely passionate about well, painting in general, and of course color mixing is, you know, my jam. So I'm just really happy that I got to do a little demonstration for you guys, and hopefully you were inspired to try something out. And it doesn't need to be in acrylics, but by really limiting your color palette, you begin to have an appreciation for those few colors that you're working with. So I encourage you to try that in whatever medium you you know, you strive to play with, or you strive to work with. And I did want to put in a little Jaya plug. I have officially launched my online art school called Jaya's Art School. How creative is that? So if you Google Jaya's Art School, you will find you know, where I'm going to be doing a lot of my virtual classes. And I do have an online course up there for color mixing if you are a color nerd like me and you just want to learn way more about it. Also, you can follow me along on Instagram at ArtChickJaya. And I absolutely encourage you to come and check out my Zoom demo that's going to be on February 6th. I have that information on my website as well. So awesome. I'm so glad that I got to be here with you guys.
Jaya, thank you.
I'm so glad you did too, Jaya.
Thank
That's
you so
wonderful.
much.
Thank you.